Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Gurubhe, Namo Bidaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Gurubhe, Namo Bidaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya. Kan de lai ye, guen ye do ka ne, shao ka shuo sa, bon de chun zhen zhe, chun yin jiao bo, guen yin lo san ta, se na che ba, ne de she so so, de ye na yang ga, se de de, che zhe la ma, ye zong ga che, ta lo de be, se na xian zhuo du, de ba ye zhi, de ya shu zo so, xie jie quan gu, ya we lu zhi du, ge ye zang na we, jie yu li xie so, cha be ye, lai me zi be hu, to ye jian be, ten de la zhe, ye wo che ye, nan zui mian do dang, tie jin do ye, nan zi jian zha so, we xiang ye liu, che jian ya zo li, se na xian jiu, che na jian ba li, kan xian tu me, de ne san ba yi, liu ye ye, mi ge jie ye ba, xie ba ran dong ba, so ye me de, nie ne je ba, ta de so so xia, nie me de mang de zhu la, che ye mang be, tan zhu de ye xie, guan bu jie Tenzin Dorjee Let me remind every one of ourselves to take a moment and cultivate the highest form of motivation. We call it Bodhisattva motivation, or aspiration seeking complete enlightenment for the sake of all other sentient beings. And with that kind of at least contrived altruistic motivation, we should all participate in this discourse. So those of you who have this English translation of the text called The Profound Reality of Interdependence, and we are on page 159, and subpoint 3 states extensive presentation of the arguments to establish emptiness, and this is done in two ways. First, a general presentation or demonstration, and then second one is more particular or specific explanations.
te dami gumzu ngaji ni gitembe dami gang labdi senji le ngama khanza dami dang shima shayi dami le jani songla shiri li senji le chemba nyesha tambe do jang dami ni ga tamba songso dir chunshuk zawe gombatan so the dressing so come to go ne kanza dami dang luni gangba so ji chemba nyesha shi go ne shi dami gomba dang do gomba tension jeba tara ya tedar he do tedar de pinzu somba imbe bingete kanza dami come to so da luzor so demba me shi dami da到时kanza demba me kanza dami imbe kanza jaja shogo o te da diria dami jeva heva de karti re roda karsa kaje söze tavade vasi de dami de söza dami söza maşeva çocuğun maşevi ne dami jurmuş de karısına gaze da dazin söza musun o dire gaze meju da deriz dazin deriz de musun şey labdüles söze tebeza şans ten nasıl ne var ten nasıl ne la ti tun çevala dörtte mani yönetiyle de toma reki teba seba şov müsebani çoğala semini be şir teba sabala soma yambaş görüşün şebani debesi goşi parson kozütere da dami bir yinsi lazım. Dami rabcı şevalin te güden goğde güden tel dami riveri başe bas. O da riveri var da şöyle kanza ni sozo maşe şey çocuğun cıbıcma nyamda şey şas. O da de şöyle dami da kanza da ni şeyiriz. O değil mi? Söze tebası var şası da tam o tebası orası. Karı suyu, karı nyamuz karı lingu yemedi, karı doyuna tele hakoya tebate. Endişene de tebate pazasını endişene gomguruyuz, o disi orada. Tuzu gozu yamadı o gomguru. O diyecekti değilleri.
So Geshe read from page 159 to the top of page 161, and then he went back to page 159. And so the general presentation has two subpoints, if you will. The first one is the way the view of selflessness is ascertained. So there are two types of selflessness we know, the selflessness of a person and selflessness of phenomena, but at this point they are not separated, right? Just we say selflessness, the way selflessness is ascertained, so that will be dealt with. And then how to sort of approach meditatively on that established selflessness. So we have a citation from the Anthology of Training, which is usually I call it Compendium of Bodhisattva Trainings, Shiksha Samukcha, and there. And as Geshe explained, that the way this text will present reasons and analysis to establish selflessness at this point. It's not separating the two selflessnesses, but take them together as if, right, one. So the first thing first that we need to study, right, Teba means we need to listen to teaching on, what it is, right? So once we have understood what it is, established through study or listening to the teaching, then we will contemplate the meaning of what it is, and then we are going to meditate to deeply penetrate into that meaning. So as we often say, that Thersam Komsum, listening, contemplation, and meditation, they must always together, right? They must be integrated together. But of course, it starts with listening to teaching or study. The modern word is studying it. That once we establish what selflessness is through study, now we can contemplate what really is the meaning, and then we will do meditation to deeply penetrate into that meaning.
What did you consider in nearly Susan goes to the Bonds dog, near Tebas, some until the Gomgris, Susan goes to Bond dog is what did it? Switch at Tebas. So that curry there's a Teba nearly Teba to Denga to get the machine and the collier. Bonds of Bonam do that. Tigakumaro, what you can tell me the Switch at Tabas. This what the Tabutisha said, the going to Kani, you would do. The all you are carrying, going out to Gumzu Kari to what to get your what you say to get the long dog in Namshar of the shares. Any sheen, any North Shin, Susta, and but then any Gumguri, so this order.
So often in Buddhism, we adopt this what we call threefold approach, which consists of listening, Theba, or studying, and contemplation, Samba in Tibetan, and then Khomba, meditation, isn't it? But they follow sequentially, right? And of course, before we decide to contemplate or meditate, we really have to make sure, to study or to receive complete teaching and understanding of whatever it is that we are going to focus on, right? The subject matter, the topic, right? Call it, And so that only comes through listening or study, right? I'm using the study as a modern translation, but in the Buddhist we use the word listening to teaching, So there's a listening, through listening, so we understand what needs to be abandoned, what needs to be adopted, right? So we will learn about, what the practice consists of, in other words, So once we are sure about it, so to speak, now the next thing is then suggest that we may go into solitude, right? Going into forest, for example, so where we can do focused contemplation and then meditation on whatever that topic, we are dealing with.
What did it? Switch at Tabas, I said, till not so never shall, Yamba shall last, Sonsha, Medulla Gomba Shah, Jesus, what is that? Tombo and the bed, they do good of the Pano Namza, the Yambo Chambers yet. But this year's on any Gomgurden, there was that. Nas never shall start. Tuzu goes to the remote of the chain, Gom Shanson, any chain, but then Gomguris. Was then Yambasha, Zonsha, that Medulla Gomasha said there, Desire case and Medu going to any. Then we say that come away going to any don't you go to choices going to Maway or Tina, that is next share. Medulla so Gomashas. Desire said, no, she was yours. There's a Desire Medu go here. Until that's also the new boy, Danzi, the new boy, the Dami go to any Ninji Karsa did that. 7 年不你这个面这城市这个，我听说你不看这个这个，我的那下写说呢，这个哪是年的公务人士，哪是年是这种 There are empathy, there are.
No.
What is it?
So Geshe-la's explanation pertains to that one stanza quoted from Anthology of Training or Compendium of Bodhisattva Trainings. It says, seek out and study the object of forbearance. So this basically emphasizes the first thing first, that whatever we want to practice, where we feel, I need to cultivate, this particular antidote, right, to counteract my whatever particular afflictive emotion dealing with. So we have to make sure we understand that antidote very well, right? Once we have understood it well through listening, now we can go into forest, it says. Then remain in the forest is a way of saying like be in a solitude. That's another way of like understanding going to the forest. So now in a solitude, now we can really stay focused and do contemplation and meditation on our topic and then cultivate that particular antidote. So the example given here is meditate on things like foulness. Right? I usually translate as repulsiveness. The Tibetan word is midukpa, right? Maybe the most plain English is ugliness, right? That's what it means. Plainly, it means ugliness. But here is foulness and repulsiveness. So this is just an example given, so to speak, that depending upon whatever we feel individually and personally is our dominant afflictive emotion, right? So for many of us, it could be attachment, Dorjee, right? And so the antidote to that attachment, of course, the temporary antidote is to study, to listen to teaching on the repulsiveness, ugliness, or the foulness of, the things. And so once we really understood that teaching very well, we know that, okay, I got this antidote under my belt, then go into solitude and just, stay focused and cultivate that. Okay. Now let's say, for someone we say, okay, my main thing is grasping at self-apprehension. Okay. Now the antidote to that is the selflessness, isn't it? So we have to study well what selflessness means, completely what it really is. So once we have understood it, then go into forest or the solitude. Now stay focused contemplation, meditation, and cultivate selflessness and apply it to the self-apprehension or self-grasping. Or somebody, where our dominant afflictive emotion is what we call ignorance or close-mindedness. Here it just translates as delusion somewhere. And so for that, suggestion is that, we can, reflect on the dependent arising, the enumeration of phenomena, right? The idea is that if you feel like I know so much, Geshe didn't put it that way, right? Okay, look at the enumeration of phenomena. There are a lot more you don't know, right? So that can be an antidote to that egoism, if you will. So depending upon, right, whatever is my predominant afflictive emotion, so I want to find out the real antidote to that first, right? Learn that through listening to teaching. And then once I really understood it, go into forest or solitude and stay focused, do contemplation and meditation on it, right? So that's what the anthology of training is telling us.
What the Congress that is the Nimbo Pangsan Jamin, the Nimbo meaning to check the Marava, so Nimbo Ha Gomguris, Dorjee is an Mudu Gomia, then we get an Tenjo Gomia, any contract in the Shizo in the Seva Gomia, Shajus and Isigovia, what they said, so Gumzi the head, but Chevy is usually.
So bottom line is that, right, there are so many objects of abandonment, we just can't restrict them. So whatever we feel is my main sort of a problem, object of abandonment, so we want to study that first. And as the example says here, if attachment is really bothering and troublesome, then really listen to teaching on the repulsiveness or foulness or the ugliness of things, and then that can temporarily, right, at least help us to overcome it. Of course, to uproot it, we have to meditate on the selflessness there, right? And or that if we feel that, well, anger is my problem, right? I often get angry easily. Well, then, we need to study about patience. tolerance. We need to study about love, maybe compassion. And then once we have understood them, go into solitude and stay focused and cultivate them, isn't it? And so if our main concern is I want to deal with ignorance, right? Want to uproot that, well, then study about the dependent arising and the emptiness. Once you really understood them, then go into solitude and do focus, contemplation, and meditation. So as we say, that objects of abandonment are many, and so are the antidotes to all of them, isn't it? Like the different objects of abandonment might require different antidotes to deal with them and to counteract them. And then sometimes some of the antidotes are kind of temporary ones, and then there are other antidotes we need to cultivate.
What did that say the Toma Congress? You move, but when you are Shoshabo Gonoya Tondala, in it, Yimbo Soso go, Demu Yimbolia Casa, Dozanimo Mido go, Demu Yimbo Dendro Goyando. And the country are going to do your race. Then to get the someone to your bonga tita, the tattoo the Congress, and the Casa. Then the 10 human be someone choosing someone bonga that she will go by tita, Tongse told the Congress, and the damage of a share of Congress. The Nimbo tattoo the damage of Nimbo. 가가 지금 저거로 카드 통화 애니 가서 여자님 뭐도 고마데 세상이 뭐데 참하고 막 때문에 뭐 데리고 뭐 내가 고마 데리리스 타도도 그야데 돈이 거나 고조지리스 어디서
So as Geshe continues to explain that, we, so to speak, deal with our afflicted emotions in two ways, right? First, we have to deal with what we call more like the manifest afflicted emotions, right? They are really bothering us and troubling us more, right? So that could be like depending upon our own individual, habituation, so to speak. That for some it could be attachment, for others it could be the anger and hostility, for others it could be the egoism kind of thing, or not knowing too much about anything. So therefore, there are different antidotes. As we said, repulsiveness and fullness for attachment, patience and love for, anger, and then studying about this enumeration of phenomena, right? And some of the examples given here of the different elements, the different, what we call the sources, remember? So that way we will be able to deal with the manifest predominant afflicting emotions. But of course, the final solution or the antidote, the ultimate one, so to speak, is really to understand selflessness, right? And then that can help us to uproot the afflictive emotions.
What did that Toma? When you are going to you so good. And then when you go to and someone's let me just point out line, don't you do a share of Congress? So they got that Jigbarda. You will talk about the Kadu, there's by Gono, so go remote. So I pause at the language of Poyas, Tonda, let them with a share of Yomara.
So this, what Geshe just explained, is applicable to, in a general sense, for our practice. In other words, that in order to deal with or counteract manifest afflicted emotions temporarily, then we have a variety of antidotes, right, depending upon the specific afflicted emotion. But if our goal final is to be able to get rid of them completely, uproot them, right, so that they will never be able to come back, they can never arise in our mind, the final solution or the antidote is the same, everybody accept it, which is the wisdom realizing selflessness, right? So once we understand what selflessness is, then go into the solitude and cultivate that wisdom, and we have that wisdom, right? That is the antidote to all afflicted emotions, to get rid of them for good, meaning that they can never come back, they can never arise again in our minds.
Oh, did that? Tomo so beginning with the Nazar the Sukja means and so Saya Nasa Koshaya means Kakayo. The Sukja means sort of the get that Kadu and Doja the Midu Gomas. Then we hear then you go to the Kadu Nimuteres. That Tarduna, and you got Nazakora Amados in the TV and the TV. Carino, me, the Master or Dick Tower or Tina Tardu the
So if I will give you an example here, it's just like that, when we, have, health issue and we are so much in pain, well, that pain is so urgent. Maybe that's not the real problem, isn't it? So we need to be given a painkiller medication or get a shot, right? First we have to deal with the pain. And then we have to deal with the actual, whatever that health issue is. And the example is a TB, tuberculosis. Well, your problem is tuberculosis. Now we need to put you through that whole treatment to get rid of that. But before you really apply the tuberculosis treatment, well, here's so much pain, we are screaming. So we need the first level kind of deal with the pain. So those temporary antidotes, so to speak, are like painkiller medications. You have an attachment issue as a manifest problem. So the painkiller medicine is understand and reflect on repulsiveness, the foulness, And we have anger problem. The painkiller medication is kind of like cultivate the love, the patience, things like that. And we the other issue is that we feel like I know everything. Well, look at all the diversity of phenomena, elements, and the constituents and the sources, and then we know. There's so many more we don't know. So that's like the first level kind of thing. But then, of course, to treat the real issue, and then we said the final treatment on the medication for all afflicted emotions is to cultivate the wisdom of realizing selflessness.
What did that? Said the Nazar in the neck of the social and the Tatu got something so me Kaka into your what this was to be what today is the then you move some Jungji you would have here Jeva last Trebanya Shagoni, Damu goes in this. That Nico won't your death, but show death gone to Sona and got all the boy some of the war. But all the boy some of the anything in the gum. Hila Sungji the John, Terrasic part Hila Sungji John, and you to Cherta, no to Gongri, so this is it.
So Geshe explanation pertains to what you find on page 160 in the middle section there. So as Geshe used those examples, like when we have health issues, doctors have to prescribe different medications to deal with all that pain and the symptoms and everything, right? And then finally they diagnose what the real issue is, and now they have to, deal with that second level. So like that, if we have a very dominant or predominant afflicted emotion, very manifested one, first we have to really deal with that. At least bring the intensity of that affliction down, And so then we can go to the next level of practice, So the next level of practice involves, cultivating the view of selflessness through mindfulnesses, right? And that's what is talked about here. And of course, we need to cultivate, as we said, the wisdom realizing selflessness. But actually, what's involved in the actual cultivation practice is we have to cultivate what we call the unity or the union of calm abiding shamatha and the vipassana, right? The wisdom realizing emptiness, because these integrated, calm abiding shamatha and the vipassana is the real antidote to uproot all our delusions. So that's the second level one. First, deal with the manifest delusion, at least bring it down a little bit, right? That's all we can get, and then we can, move to the next level to practice it. Yeah.
What did you the the joke there, he was the Tibetan in the 吕车吧年下说同那么学养到里边龙说龙说也是这边也不是这呢松说是学养到里边多些说的控制的tilde呢但就是的我tilde着下说的我咱们是那个人不这不的
So then it says that, of course, the second level is now we try to understand and cultivate the view of selflessness, but that is done through also practicing the mindfulnesses. And so those are really explained, for example, in a scripture called, here translated as Compendium of Dharma, Shu Yang Daba Do. We usually say the Sutra of the Sutra of Yang Dharma, the perfect Dharma, anyway. Right? So that tells us about cultivating the mindfulnesses, which includes the mindfulness of the body and so forth. Yeah.
어때 그래서 시zo 그래서 영tin일에 제대로 심으스 주니 동반일을 주고 샤데 시zo에서 감축다 리베제지도 얘기 녀제 소아조지 기고네세 다음에 군주 yapsenje do changne yapsenje do changne jebar songsos 오데다 그래서 저거 해야죠 이 녀지 소 이니지 소아조지 세해라 그래서 이 녀지 소아조지 거기 소아지가 뇌자 해도돼 자야데 이니지 소아세 해야죠 어디 되게 가르가르 연구 유미 디니고 가르가르 공주 유미 어쩌 강가데 되게 얘기해서 yapsenje do
So in the middle of page 160, there is a statement which reads, in an extensive explanation of the way of meditating on emptiness by means of the 6 elements, the 6 sense fields of texture, and the 18 feelings of mental movement, it cites texts like the Meeting of the Father and Son Sutra. So that's the enumeration of phenomena there, right? So we talk about that as we are meditating on the dependent rising and emptiness, so that could also involve taking into account the different the elements. They mention about the 6 elements here, or sometimes we talk about the 18 constituents or the sources, right? And then here is particularly mention of the 18 feelings of mental movement. I think in the Abhidhamma Kosha or the Treasure of Knowledge, there's mention of different feelings, and that could also kick up different types of attachment and how to, address them or deal with them.
Teta dame se gumzu ngajini ki tembe se dame jang labdu sendile se ngama khansa dame dang shima shui dame dang songla shira leo sendile cheba nyesha dame dwe jang dame nika dama songso de junjuk zawe gongpa tan so de zhasen so yi kam chu ge go ne se kang sa da me tang lun gang ba da so ji che ba nie sha xi go ni che de me se da me go ma tang ko sa de ma tang lun gang ba so ji che ba nie sha xi go ne se che da me go ma tang go ma ten xing 제발 달리 장한테서 셰도 대단해 핀주 처음에인베세 민게데 가사다미 가사다시 감추 소당 루저서 데마라이 메바 최이다메다 다 당초 가사 데마 메바 가사다미 다미 가사다미 베세 가사 자야 쇼고스 오다 제만 이제 된지데 마 형수 대지로 라디오 신리 제자라면서 조주 신리세에서 거사데 히라르 신리서 대대 믿음도 케어 말시 돈다 가지 지바레스 다시 풍보다 더 신을 쉬이다면 되어서 다시 가사 주제는 가사 때문에 냠도 거기 때로 거면서 거기 레베 도예로 들에 말이스 아니 쉐이 더 가게 배 쉐이 다음에 가사 다음에 니가 된 쇼리 쇼디스 거다.
So Geshe-la's explanation pertains to what you find in the last paragraph on page 160, so which really highlights dealing with the two types of selflessness, and the selflessness of a person, Gangsak Dharma in Tibetan, and selflessness of phenomena, Choji Dharma. So of course the different texts might slightly differ in terms of presenting them, but there is no contradiction, right? How it is stated in, for example, the anthology of training, or in the notes on the wisdom chapter of the Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life, and things like that. So, for example, often the self of a person, or selflessness of a person established on the basis of the 6 elements that constitute a person, so to speak, right? And then when we deal with the self of phenomena, or the selflessness of phenomena, then we look at the aggregates of a person, and then we look more into that, then we will say the body and the hair and the nail and the, go into those things, right? But the two selflessness are not unrelated, like two completely different things. They are very much related, whether we're talking about selflessness of a person or selflessness of phenomena, they are related to each other.
Dominica den showris. Okay, but the Pumbo the Kansa Damida Shay Davis Zo the Hilda. Dozo Kansa the Damida Kansa Damishe. Daji Pumbo Damid Shay Damis. Zo the Kansa Damid Shay Damini. Bongazi shared what the Zovaka shared. Daji Pumbo the Dozo Kansa indicates sugar method. Show you the dimension Nagasor. Not to take as a camera.
So basically, some texts, of course, some authors say like this particular text kind of highlights or deal with the selfness of a person, not the selflessness of phenomena. That deals with the selflessness of phenomena, not person. They kind of differentiate too much there. But here the author says like, there is not really, a text can highlight both selflessnesses, because selflessnesses, the way we differentiate between them is, in reference to the basis upon which each of them is established, isn't it? When we establish selflessness on the basis of a person is the basis, right? Then we call that selflessness as a person. When we take the aggregates as the basis, then we establish the selflessness of phenomena. So selflessnesses are the same, only the bases are different. So it is okay for a text to deal with both those things, because two selflessnesses are not unrelated. They're very much related there. Yeah.
The Kong Kaza Dame, Kaza Dame Chamo Yimbaras, love this long, love the long Kong Kong Kaza Dame, Kaza Dame Chamo Yimba. Love you long he Sendile so did that does the Javanese Suiza Teva Chas so yes Zuru te kona ni to mong du to ba se de te gombe rong ju yi ni mo yi bang du den de mong du ji mi du sho se se ba ti tun jo ale ti tun jo du be zu du nu mo be ni mo rong xin sam de da here de she de te da re la Tenzin mong du she ne do long du ba nam ju ju ge se ba so yi liu she da she ri su ja ri yo la de yang hilika zam lab ju pen ju ja ni he na le ba mo no was o de ra的就是的，就在修对毛包贴刚才呢，就是写了六高的，就刚才熊写的这样的，可是伢说是这样的写的呢，我的题没着。
但是di kan de ko ma so tanda di labdi nang gi ruwa ge kangsa tame chamo ngel ne she kan de chamo de di decision labdi nang ne she ngel ge kangsa tame she de kangsa tame chamo rest lai je di ka lo ge
kangsa tame she ngoso ji dang she ne tanda de tenjo nu mi se shi ma kangsa tame de raja de zyo to kangsa tame sha ji ro wo de so de rak ba ro
ore
kangsa rashi be de ka re kangsa tame chamo ro wo de so
ale da da di labdi ne she de kangsa rangshi me de she go lo
kangsa tame se labdi she se de kangsa tame chamo she sha so da ga ji che ma so da
no di da da shuma de ge ka so ma da chunju gi ka sa ge khon da ge da ge shu so ye de ko ma se chunju gi she ra liu na ne she ba da ka she ba sa ge
chunju she ra liu na she ba da da labju li she ba da 我只刚刚要现在的可以看着他们做些事，可以学他们些啥就，这是没啥要的，重要嘛的是。你看看着他们学他们些说的说的。
啊，你讲了那些说的。So Geshe explanation pertains to the top paragraph on page 161, and I think it seems like some authors say that. The anthology of training, or I call the compendium Bodhisattva training, Shiksha Samucha, it reflects the selflessness of person, not the selflessness of phenomena, whereas the Shantideva's chapter 9 on the wisdom shows the selflessness of phenomena, not of the person, right, like that. And here the author says, no, both of those texts can really deal with the two selflessnesses. So it's not like they deal with one kind and not the other kind, right? That's I double check with Geshe. And so there is a mention of how in the anthology of training, Shiksha Samucha, it says the formal selflessness of person is also the subtle selflessness of person. So what does that mean? Is, as you know, that when we talk about selflessness of person in terms of self-sufficient and substantially existent self, right? Selflessness of a person in terms of self-sufficient and substantially existent self of a person, that is what we call the coarse selflessness of a person. Now the subtle selflessness of a person is that a person is empty of intrinsic self, right? And so what is talked about in the anthology of the training is the subtle selflessness of the person, meaning that it talks about the it talks about how a person is empty of intrinsic self, so that's what we are talking about, right?
Yeah. Well, this thing you comes to Kansa dame chui dame gangza chan chara yo marwa.
No.
That the mama she got curse Ranju measure the Kansa dame chui dame gangza chara shan ka she go.
No.
And then you go Jiba shines or this and they say she go to go to
No. So why all of these kind of terminologies are coming out, like subtle selflessness and core self, all of that, is, I think this is my footnote also come in the later section, but as Geshe mentioned, from the Prasangika Madhyamika point of view, the highest Buddhist philosophical point of view, two selflessness of person and selfless phenomena are qualitatively same, right? There's no difference. The only difference is the basis upon which each of them is established, and so it's not that the selflessness of person is coarse and the selflessness of phenomena is subtle, not like that. For Prasangika, both selflessnesses are qualitatively the same, call it a subtle or whatever you want. Whereas the other Buddhist schools of thought, including Saivatantrika Madhyamika, the sub-school of middle way, right? Because they have a different, contentions with regard to the two selflessnesses. And because of that, they said the object of negation for each of the self is different, right? The object of negation for the selflessness of a person, the object of negation for the selflessness of phenomena are different for Saivatantrika Madhyamika and schools below. For Prasangika, the object of negation is just the same, isn't it? Only the basis upon which the selflessness is established is the same. So that's why all these issues are coming up, So Geshe read the bottom part of page 161, which really now we move into the subpoint 2 called identifying such things as the self, that is the object of negation and self-apprehension, and the two sentences on top of page 162. So here the main thing is trying to identify what kind of self is negated or refuted, isn't it? Like when we talk about the object of negation or refutation, so something is negated or refuted. So what is it? What kind of self are we talking about here? Okay? And the self that is identified as the conceived object, usually I translate as referent object, of self-apprehension or self-grasping, is the intrinsic self. Okay? Right? The footnote, hypothetically speaking, right? If self were to exist intrinsically, how should it exist? That's what we're talking about. So there is intrinsic self, which is the kind of self that is being negated or refuted. And so what does intrinsic self mean? And so that's very clearly presented by great Indian master Aryadeva in his Chaduksheda, 400 stanzas on the middle way, which is at the bottom of page 161. So let me read it here. Here, the self is the intrinsic nature of an entity that does not depend on other entities. So that's the definition of intrinsic self, right? It's the kind of self that does not depend on any other entities. So when that kind of a self is, how should we say, refuted with regard to a person, then we say the self as a person. When that kind of self is negated or refuted with regard to phenomena, so we talk about selfless phenomena. Yeah. So this is how the conceived object of self-apprehension, translated here, usually we use the word self-grasping, Tenzin in Tibetan, right, is that kind of a self. You know? A kind of a self that does not depend on any other entities, that does not depend on any conceptual thought, basically. Yeah.
What did that because the Kansa da choose a correction there is a correction. Kansa da hit the choose that is the Kansa she or disagrees. What they choose Kansa and they agrees. And that's the Kansa da says the Gajeta da Linde de da says you know. This Kansa does the wrong thing to the and Linde de Kansa in that the Linde de die in the tiny you get it. That means God there because in the Rangi to Kansa to me as you what the
So here we are really trying to identify clearly the kind of self that really does not exist, you know, so we're trying to refute it, even though it doesn't exist in reality, but you know, we conceive such a self to exist. It's the conceived object of our self-apprehension, and that self is called intrinsic self, meaning the kind of self that does not depend on any other entities, including conceptual thought, you know. So that is the objectification. But we must also understand there is a conventional self, right, which does exist. And that conventional self is what we call the basis for the law of karmic actions and results, isn't it? So there is a conventional self, or the self that exists conventionally, which is the basis for performing actions and experiencing the result of the action. So that self exists. But there's a kind of self that does not exist, which is refuted. That's called intrinsic self. Yeah.
What did that? So the Gaza did it, because Lindy thinking that Gaza does a car mother said. But you didn't not get the league into not get how this Roshi to what they do so shit. That Roshi was so down to the Demi to a shady because that the Dami couple said, what did Gaza? The says here the Hita couple is yours. Yes, the Yaman the Gaza Gash and Yaman the Gaza Lama led the Rakwami Kamu. It Tata to Dotongas Yomara, what did she say? That the patient name of General Marconi, this or Rangi, you were the you were the right to work that, because usually Rangi, you was it. Rangi may have said, what in this sort of shot over. That General saved with Tony, and Rangi, you were the baby, Chevron, you say, what did that?
So this is the crux of the matter, to be able to, you know, differentiate between the kind of self that exists conventionally, which is the basis for performing karmic actions and experience the result of karmic actions, and the kind of self that does not exist at all, which is called intrinsic self, and we are trying to refute it, isn't it? When these two types of self, we are not able to differentiate, they conflate with each other, that's where we end up, you know, in one of the two extremes, as we usually say, you know. So that's why when we say that selflessness is difficult to understand, it's basically we find it very difficult to differentiate between the self that does not exist and the self that does exist, you know. And so before Lama Tsongkhapa came on the scene, Lama Tsongkhapa was watching me from behind there for new people. So that was 14th century, my footnote. You know, even in Tibet, you know, so many people, or many, I should say, many subscribe to the view that if self exists, then it must exist intrinsically, isn't it? So, I mean, the existence is taken as equal to intrinsic existence. Intrinsic existence means same thing. So if something doesn't exist intrinsically, then it should not exist at all. So the non-intrinsic existence is taken as complete non-existence, right? So that's the extreme, isn't it? So that's why to understand selflessness, you know, we have to identify clearly and precisely what is being negated. If we negate too much, then we end up becoming nihilists, isn't it? Now we say that, well, nothing exists intrinsically, so nothing exists at all, right? But then if you don't negate enough of that, we said, well, something exists intrinsically, right? A little bit, even then. Now then we are falling into the extreme of eternalism, isn't it? So this is why it's so important for us to be able to see the difference between intrinsic existence is not the same as existence, isn't it? Okay? And non-intrinsic existence is not the same as complete non-existence. So if we can differentiate these two things, then we really get caught up in this whole, what called the extreme viewpoints there. Right? That's why often we say, you know, understanding selflessness is difficult, because being able to precisely differentiate between the kind of self, we said, the basis of karma and action that exists, the kind of self that does not exist at all. You know, if we can't differentiate, if we said, oh yeah, there is a karma, I exist, you know, so you know, I must exist intrinsically, otherwise how can I perform actions and high result, right? Well, now we are eternalists, isn't it? Well, really, self doesn't exist intrinsically. Oh, that means I don't exist at all? Everything is just fabrication? So now we have become nihilists, right? This is the tough matter where we are dealing with.
What is that? Persa Nipanyo, there's the meter bebala. Kaza shake the Gugu Dada. Dangzina, Tizakabe, Dameba, Namshita, Shena, Sheva Shadis. Said the Gonzo Dasa, she said, Dangzisha, she. Dangmesa Songdua, but the Kari Das, Karis, Gogi Da Karchiksi. That Dangzis at Karisi, Goguzi, and Taka with Dame Betawas Karis is Lavna, Suada. She was sure Kaya, Tobia Angi, Shazamai Bar, Romon Truba, Zimbati, Dinzis, Kinji, Suada. Chukarina, Toba does my Baram, and it. Dangzi is, Ninja is. Tini Kaza, I think to that, Kaza Damita, Chujan one with Gaza Tara Yomarava, said this Kaza did the Kaza Damika, Shay did the Kan Shay Damiris, or this. Kaza Ila, Tira Gaza da the Kaza, Tintre. Gaza da the Kanza didn't never Kanza Damida. Shay didn't be Shay Dami, Dami the Jode. Sijapar da da Jane. Can you move on? Yes, here Rama Rashide, Timmy Dameva. Didn't show the Kanza Yanis door. Shay Davi, the Kansa Dame, she is also did that. Because go you da the garrison, Dara and you what it is that. Because Dara, you what the Kansa did the Kansa Dame. Shay, the even would the Shay Dame, what he carried me to. She chose it in the Shama to Gaza Dar Shava Maris. What did you want that?
So on page 161, under the subpoint 2 caption, the second paragraph, it says, the innate apprehension of self is to apprehend any phenomenon to objectively exist without simply being conceptually posited. Now that is the instrumental right statement, right? We are trying to understand, what does intrinsic reality or self means. So intrinsic reality or self means that something that exists objectively from its own side without being imputed or posited, right? Referentially or posited by a concept, So does such a thing exist? No. But we do conceive, right, such a self. So that's called the conceived object of self-apprehension or the self-grasping. Also, as Geshe explained, so there are these terminologies we are dealing with. Da, self, isn't it? Tenzin, self-apprehension or self-grasping, isn't it? And then Dharma, selflessness, right? And so we said, well, there is a kind of self that exists, right? And that's called conventional self, which is the basis for karmic actions and results. But then there's a kind of self that doesn't exist, we call intrinsic self. So what does that mean? We already defined it, isn't it? So if we can identify in our mind clearly, such an intrinsic self, and now we try to look for it, right? Does such a self exist on person? Well, it doesn't. So that lack of intrinsic self of a person is called selflessness of a person. Does such an intrinsic self, is it findable on phenomena? We couldn't find it. So the phenomena is empty of such intrinsic self. So that's called the selflessness of phenomena. So from Prasangika point of view, as we said, with regard to the intrinsic self that's being negated, the object of negation, there is no difference, right? It just exactly the same thing, So the two selflessnesses are exactly the same, qualitatively the same. The only difference that between these two selflessnesses is the basis upon which each of them is established. One is a person and the other is aggregate, right? That's the only difference, because as selflessnesses, they both are same. And in terms of negating the intrinsic self, exactly the same thing. Okay?
Taking the children, children, Kansa lejin da bos. Kansa sur kors lejin. Lejin da koda. Lejin gu lagba da kangba nawa se ko na. De da chö ko da. Da hit da chö she. Da jo de kansa sig da. But go resi. Ko chao se kansa ko chao. Da dangzi ni hi gi da ni re da ni ne Ribura, Tanya de Mela. Dandini is the Dandini is music concert, Chuni, Dandini, Mugune concert, Chuni, base. Taking the Dani, the many son, Tanya de Edos, you are that Kansa sure you are. Kansa sure you show them with the Kansa near your is. That Kansa does show does and make it this or this or that.
So Geshe-la's explanation pertains to technically the third paragraph, but on page 162 there. And so the example given of who really exists and what doesn't exist is the name of a person called Ubagupta, right? Lejin often shows up in the Buddhist literatures, right? So there is a person called Ubagupta, Lejin, so what we really need to understand are the difference between conceived objects we call shenyu, often we translate as referent objects, the things that don't exist object, And then the observed objects, the migul, right? They do exist, And so when you look at the two conceptions of selves, right? Because we have self of a person, self of phenomena, in terms of the what they translated here as the observed objects, migul in Tibetan, right? They exist because a person exists, or persons exist, and aggregates exist, right? And so with regard to them, then we have a sense of right self or the I. But in terms of the conceived objects, the two selves, they don't exist at all. The self of a person and the self of a phenomena, right? Because that's the intrinsic self, right? We think of intrinsic self. So those two objects are very different. The conceived object, the shenyul, referent object, consists of intrinsic selves. They don't exist. And that's, even though they don't exist, we have a grasping apprehension of such a self, right? That's why we need to deal with. But there are selves that do exist, right? And those selves referred to often, right? We think of person and aggregates, right? Self of a person, often we say, what's the basis person? Self of phenomena, what's the basis? We say aggregates, right? So Upagupta's aggregates, when we think of Upagupta's like the legs and the limbs and the nail, so that constitutes, right, part of the aggregates. And then there's a person called Upagupta, right? Yeah.
What did that concept? Then that, then you did what they kill that. Kansa choose the Kansa, the hit in the Kansa, the choose it. Don't you Kansa, the Kansa, Timothy, Gaja Gonzan Shagmarwa, what did that? So Ronji did Gaja Gon Shagorwa. So the Minda, the Tenyu Lulia, Minda, she wanted to do that. Gaja Gon Shaya Marty, Sushi Gon Sharis. Kenda Gaja Gon Shai, in it. Kansa Dami, the Shuki Dami, Chara use the Gagatin Gorwa. That take you and the Shushi Gon Shama, the Gaja Gon Mijala, in Chara Shagu, Marako, Shushi Kansa. Teaching the Dami de Kaza Damishe, teaching Minaso, Shay Damisha, to Shashan Dioro, what did it?
So according to Prasangika's, as we said this before, the two selflessnesses, selflessness of person and selflessness of phenomena, are not qualitatively different. They are just the same, isn't it? The only difference is in terms of the basis of designation or the imputation, isn't it? The basis of designation for a person and the basis of designation for phenomena are different. So the Prasangika said that what is negated or refuted intrinsic self is exactly the same thing. So therefore, the selflessness established by refuting that is exactly the same thing, right? Whereas the other schools, they make a difference, right, between the two self-apprehensions, and because they said the basis are, they say that what is being refuted is different, and what's refuted for the self of a person, what's refuted for the self phenomena are different. So therefore, they talk about one selflessness as being coarse, the other selflessness as being subtle. So the two selflessnesses are not the same. One is coarse and one is subtle. So those are the philosophical standpoint differences between Prasangika and other Buddhist schools of thought, including Savatantrika Madhyamika. So we will stop there today, and we welcome questions. First, we will go to our Dharma friends on the cyberspace, and then we'll come back here.
Thank you, Geshe. There's one question.
Sure.
Pretty simple. It says, the meaning of selflessness seems to be the same as emptiness. Is that a correct understanding, or are there any differences between selflessness and emptiness?
Okay, so the question is about whether selflessness and emptiness mean the same thing. Is that
correct?
Okay. Tajetone chiwa shukuduwas again. Tajetone kandi shue di kare sanang ando tame senge tanya peji shigo orwage. Then ya tongni senge tanya peji shigo orwage. Tongni sana tame se di kichi chikwa she ingore ya mandani she ingore kare yes again. Tunji minga namra re ya mandani she di gore sa.
Did that Karsa 다 제도에 배색이 때 개발하래. 동의에서는 동의 참모를 거그러와. 당면에서도 저는 실제로 당면에서도 요새 강가 당면에 대해서 잘 알아서 현티시 왔다. 동의에서도 가서 내려가서들 좀想말와. 당면에니까 범박가 와서 당면이 있어 그러와. 이게 동의 있어 말와.
지단에 쓴 거로겠나
당면에다 동의 제발 좀 가져와서 동의 당면에서도 강가 그 동의에서는 가서 내려가면 가서 telemi 고마워.
그래 남편 어제 동의 당면이 된지 좀 폐교 말. 근데 tinju바게 동의 라면 당면은 찍어 말해.
동의 당면 찍어 말해.
tinju발라.
말해. 당면 속세도 가가 당면이라 동의 말와.
그래. 저도 당면에 동의 말씀해야 보고 뭐 라치 말어보지 동의라로 당면에서
당면에서 그 유효시제 당면 다 좋아서 미해라 시다.
유효시제 동의 말하게.
라.
유효시제 동의 말해.
유효시제 동의 가와. 랑이 동의 동의 말해서 동그래 랑이 동의 뭐 제가.
유효시제 랑신 동의 잡아 말하게.
라.
유효베이나 랑신 동의 잡아 말하게.
어디 차라리 랑이 동의 뭐 제가 말이 거지.
네. 단데스게.
랑이 동의 뭐 제가 말이지. 동의 가서 제가
그래.
조선디 가자 가서 말아.
말해.
뭐 통화도 하지. 누구가 도.
근데 다음에 레스티.
근데 다음에라고.
오케이. 갱치로. 스피치로. Okay, let me translate what Geshe said. I don't know because that one still. I mean, there's some complexity there. I think I understood what he said. Okay, I'm still different. Geshe says that the selflessness and emptiness are not synonyms. They're different. Okay. And he said emptiness, when we talk about emptiness, is thought of in terms of absence of intrinsic reality. That's all it means. The selflessness, it doesn't mean that necessarily, right? So he used the table. He said, we can say the table is selfless, But then he said, table is not emptiness. I said, isn't everything that exists emptiness, right? He said, no, that's different, right? So Geshe is trying to differentiate between the selflessness and emptiness. Okay, so emptiness usually means it is the negation or absence of intrinsic reality, but the selflessness doesn't mean that. Hopefully that answers. Yeah.
The table has no self.
What?
So the table has no self.
Right. 저 쪽지들이야 다 요말 와서 그래.
라.
쪽지들 다 요말 와서 디스 거래 와서 다음에.
어제도 당면 있어고 당면 있어서 조선 거로 대마 좋아서 요마로 디스 거라.
temperature said what? Yeah, that's right. The table does not have a true self or truly existent self. That's what I mean. Yeah.
5 questions. Okay. I have maybe 5 questions. So today is the first day I've heard that the aggregates referred to as phenomena.
Okay.
Yeah, that we talked about objects before, but actually now the focus is on 5 aggregates as phenomena.
Right. So
So we were talking about the room and cars and stuff like that before, I thought, but now we begin to focus that phenomena are the 5 aggregates.
Oh, sure. Okay. Kurang kan dishe di siguro kita daging anzo di insarada 강사 다음에 더 최고 다음에 기 피기 가서 오래 시시어와 디 가가를 최고 다음에 되면 봐봤을 때 풍부되게 최디된 다음에 shago 와게 그래서 남주 최스 남주 망도 거기서 강바다리라와 한긴데 망고 거기서 와게 나는 남주 최라이더 와게 리더 라와다 강 신나데 최로 와게 나다 가들에 최라이디 아니 풍부지고 거기로 가려서다 최고 다음에서 풍부된 shago에 리더와 강바된 다음에
리더와 강지도 저 최이 다음에 되게 나 최이 다음에 샤디요래 이나 다다 강사 다음에도 최이 다음에 또왜 마셔야 저 어디서 계속 샤워로 어디서 풍부다 강사 인식을 뭐지 드마스 나가서 계산 샤워 말해
didn't get 다음에 shago 말와 yeah Geshe says I mean in general we can say that like say mountains or the space, everything is a phenomenon. Right? But in this context, when we talk about selflessness of a person, selflessness of phenomena, so related to the person, right? Person has aggregates. So here the basis for the selflessness of phenomena is person's aggregates, not the space or the mountains and like that. Yeah.
Also, you mentioned the 18 moments.
Oh, yes.
What are those?
Dagi ken di ji songwe imba karso gore tanda yapse jebe de nalia and the church dame shedu kalken karso ma chora chobje ji song imba ge. Chora chobje song imba. Wadi ku ji kar la gore sa chora chobje lai.
Chora chobje sa de yi ni ji chora sa ji. Ji da chora tel de du kya de ke da zhe no ji kya ji wa da. Chora chobje kya ji wa.
Chora ma da chi.
Chora nam sang.
Pero chigni song shan ge de lo de.
This yi ni ki sa da yi ki sa da kar chora de wa kya de khaze ki de wa de chora khaje sha. 더 제가 가세요. 감가와 열세요. 누스들
감가와를 쳐가지고 공부를 했었죠. They said, yeah, in the Abhidhamma Kosha, or Treasure of Knowledge, there is mention of this 18 different feelings of movements, and so related to the feelings.
Now we're adding feelings. No.
Yeah, 18. I think 18 moments of feeling movements. That's what it is here. Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's related to, sometimes they talk about, right, related to the three realms of existence, right? What kind of feelings belongs to which realm of existence, things like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how are the karmic imprints carried?
Okay.
From moment to moment or life to life?
Okay. Then the legi pakcha se or again, and the ane kiji ne ma se kewa chin chil khandes ma ane kid go resa the kazan ko chewa the rangjali go again. Legi pakcha de wage kiji ju namse den kiji ju ro wage da del ya kiji ju ro namse de den legi pakcha de kan ma kewa ching chil kan de kid go so da legi pakcha de namse de kiji ju ro wa ju ro gan den de kiji ju de namse je den de pakcha de ken kewa ching de chil ma kan de kid go resa legi pakcha de
de ganse ben de me lo jar de kiji na in the so the Geshe party meeting ma banga ro sa se wa ra lo Geshe de ke me ji na
ra ro re
lo che ne Geshe party ko banga se da wa ro ko ju de ga ma je ro se wa ra
da de pakcha cha ke dan chi se wo ge
la
pakcha de ke dan se wo ge wa jing
se da pakcha de khangsa de ro pakcha de ko me da song da da ko ju no me de ma ra kon ju ro de ju de ma se ro ro de
준대 되고 있는 디게는 박사한테 간다 스케줄 거라서 계단.
라.
준내 되게 되는데 박사한테
근데 박사 다들뭐 준튼 줘야 될 박사서 네버셔라. 제가 그 소스가 좀 소스가 맥동아들에 가요 말아. 지금 그 네버셔라 박사 안 좀세요.
아끼와 담만들에 받을 합신 네버 슬랍신 들어왔다. 근데 뭐 그거 거서 말로. 제가 지네 막 케네다 레그 박사 상에 망고 제가 망고 레그 네버셔라 왔다. 디 박사디 시작부터 간 케르고 슬라고.
어디다 그거 박사 게도 레 가르사에는 그런 주머니 받이 그래서 다시마 마다 받이 가지 레 집에 칼칼 유야 요르와.
걔한테 빼듯이 무슨 맨날 로 겨주 되게 강사 전화 거기 레 상에 망고 제대로 박사지 단다 로 겨주 받지 대디 그러와게. 니데 세션에 디 엔세우면서 들어와. 하고라. 어디지? 니 직전에 로 겨주 되게 민디 그러와게 부글간에 미 다르마 제고 즉 다음에 접제 chen 박사지 디 사디 그러와게. 예를 들면 디부시면 거 디페제 송샤나 안 코데 창마로.
그 제가 됐어요. 그래서 로 겨주 메디 근데 로 주신 게 그만 줄 거이나. 저거 로 자로서는 그 내가 그만 그러세요. 장사 되거라.
간티그레스.
그만 그요르시. 로 겨주시게 로 주가도 그요르와.
네.
그래서 로 주시 그요르 그만 그 주도.
Hello. Okay, so I think maybe the example, because that might be easy for understand, then Geshe goes in that theoretical part, how karmic imprints or karmic dispositions or karmic inclinations are carried, right, from life to life. And so the example Geshe gave, then he dropped that example. I said, maybe go with the example, that it's easier. He said, let's say a person is going to live 80 years, right? So it begins from the infanthood to the 80 year, right? And this person does all kinds of good and bad things. So all those actions leave some kind of impact, right? The tendencies or the predispositions on that person's life. For example, the person when he was a child, 10 years old, he stole something, isn't it? And so, although then he's never stole anymore, but people who knew about it, they will say, well, you stole something there. There's something still, right? we refer to that person's right action, right? But the person still taking responsible for stealing something at 10.
So that only comes from others. Does the person carry any of that imprint?
Right.
You're saying that comes from other people's imprints, not from his imprint.
No. That's the recognition, right? We said that person, he's now coming like advanced, but he did something at 10 years old. But we can say you did it, right? Still, or the 80% did not steal anything, but you did only once at 10 years old. Still, that person is taken accountable for that, right? That
but
action.
that's held by other persons. It's not it's held by other persons, not by the person himself.
Yeah, then he will recognize, yeah, that's right, I stole, right? The person will say that, right? I did,
No, but it's not held by the person himself.
Right?
It's not held by the person himself, only others? You're
No,
saying
no, but
only others.
But that, how should I say, inclination, predisposition belongs to that person who did it at 10 years old, right?
Right, but that doesn't depend on others.
But that doesn't depend on others,
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, that means like he has still some kind of a blame, and he feels bad for that too, right? So, yeah, then I learned my lesson, I never did it, but still there's some kind of right, he's accountable for that. So it's just like that, the pakchas, right?
And those imprints are carried on what?
Usually the imprint, they're carried on, as we said before, person can say on that mere sense of I, but others might more likely say on the mental consciousness. Your mind goes from one life to another life.
But the mere I does not. So
The
it
mere I
can't carry
does
the
go.
consciousness.
Yeah.
So
Mere I
what
does
carries
go.
it? The I doesn't go life to life.
The mere sense of I, yeah. The mere
Goes life to life?
the mere sense of I, according to Prasangika. Right, yeah. Prasangika says it doesn't stay. The
It's just a
imprints are not
fabrication. How can it go life to life?
Yes. Again, Uma Tenjube Chevaina, Mazam Gatan, the Kedu, Mazam said the Kawachin Rotigo, or the country doors, or that what the hunter word. Mazam said the Kawachin the Chedama country to the waters.
Mazam Sina, this is what Takdun said, Nia the Yomarishina, Ganga said, Konsa, Shiva, Gimashi Roti was
Gila Simbangas yours. Gil Tasha Bangasam the dead or
Shiva
the Shia Mazam, Dela Temba, Mazam,
the Shiva the Yamdo, that lay the Karina, Gaga call the joy, Gaga Konyam the Roti.
So the thing is that, of course, we know that the body dies and stays here, that the mind never dies. It goes from one life to another. Along with the mind, so the karmic habitual tendencies and that sense of I imputed on that mind, it goes from one life to the next life. Yeah.
I thought that dissolved at the time of death.
Say it again.
I thought that I dissolved at the time of death.
The question about the she do you call a task again, the year or some Josa. She do you call a task again, the year or some Jola or that.
Ye do it so say.
Ta the Mavachar or some Rosa.
In the mother, the church is giving another shape.
You should say, yeah, because that shouldn't happen, because then, we have no point of studying and practicing Dharma, right? The I kind of disappears at the death, right? Then what's our point of studying and practicing Dharma? Nothing goes.
The I you're referring to now is the imprints.
The
I imprints, you're referring to the imprints, not the person.
No, the I that's associated with the mental consciousness, the habitual pattern imprints and all of them, right? There's still an I designated on all of that, right? That goes from...
You're not different. That I, the imprints can go, but it does the I. You're labeling those imprints the I, so the I doesn't really go. The imprints go.
No, we don't label them as I. We said like.
You said the I goes life to life.
I just like Well, let me put this right. I'm called Tenzin Dorjee, right? Whatever this form, you mean?
Yeah.
But if you try to look for anything inside me, there's nothing Tenzin. Actually, I have 5 names. So I'm all of that, right? You don't know my other names. I'm Losam Sanden, I'm Tenzin Sherab, I'm the Tamjo Dorjee, right? And people say, how can one person be too many, right? But it's just a designation on me, and whoever knows those names, they recognize me, right? With me? So like that, it's a designation that goes along with your consciousness.
From others, but not from yourself.
No. When your mind goes from one life to the next life, that designation I goes along.
But that's personally designated by yourself, right?
Oh, I see. Who designated? I of course the ta second tangent so se ta su ta so that ta di that get kasa did what get ta sam get nga de do de la wa ta ko ta la de ko tangye mi sku wa wa de tangye mi sha ba su ta ko de nga nga ta ko de kan de so ta se.
But the question of Tanya, that become a mill, Mr. Tagada, the Kogan, los Angeles, the 네가 뭐 다셔 줘라.
다 왜 디선데 미 샹바 그 따고도 와라 소소소 따게 요 말외서 녜 셰바디 찍찍 누구나 땅에 미갈 따인 거랑 아래 따르고 그래서 다
아마
땅에
택해서 다나지 수다는 지와 가지 다 거기서 얘네 지와라.
다이네 나도 나다 강아서 디긴 독재 똑바디 쓰러다 수 똑바디라고 근데 디세진 약
아니 나가도 매 됐어서 내길에 사실 거기길에 사실 로상어지 도야 똑바디 내길에 사실 리미셔다 길 열어. 지바라.
코랑코라래 요로
그런 거라요.
So Geshe says, the designation doesn't matter who did it, other people did it on you, or you designated yourself. But that designation, right? Once we recognize, that's the same. Yeah. It doesn't matter other people designated you, right? Your name's called Lobsang Monjo, right? Now you accept that as you, isn't it?
So,
like
you're,
that's
you're just saying people's other opinions determine my next life?
That nede la me shambagi kare la ba ina nge kewa shuma la pen dingo ro sa mi shambagi yagdu kare la ba ina ngala tokba ta ba ina. That we disem gol kan shen ta ba la de shen sange kare ta ba de ngal pen de dingo ro.
다스 디자 메셔다 로상어지 라베나 텔코 로상어지 페노데 계속 가 말아봤지. 지당을 계속 들어와니. 미스는 거서 미치 도세 민두서 도세아죠. 식저
Tamara pe disem gol de ben losa on ju kuma rai salam na mi shambagi ro ba ge. Ta de ko kewa shuma de kuma ge le de nyang ro bela ro ka mi shambagi gol kuma ta ro da nge da ga situation de.
어디다 코코마 마이와 코코마레슬라나 코코가 좀 디바티 메텔 차고다.
Because I want Geshe to come with a very clear example. I give him, otherwise Geshe is just going in a very abstract way. So what Geshe is saying is this, right? I mean, in the case of Lobsang Monjo, right, there's no confusion here. It's neither good nor bad. It's just a name. So somebody named you Lobsang Monjo, you accept it, we all recognize you, you recognize yourself, isn't it? Now let's say if somebody, I just made it up, accuse you of a thief, right? Lobsang Monjo is the thief. So would that affect your next life? Is that your question, right? Geshe says, well, if somebody alleges you to be a thief, you did not do anything, it shouldn't affect you. That person should be responsible for creating bad karma. But if you did steal something, somebody is a thief, then it's a different matter, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Make a distinction between a general near eye, which is a near eye imputed on the continuum of the consciousness,
Yes.
which continues.
Right.
And the specific near eye, which are these like Lobsang Monjo, that doesn't continue.
The imputed eye continues?
General
Near eye, which is imputed on the mind.
That doesn't go life to life.
Yeah, it does. This is the general. But
Right.
the specific eye, like let's say there's a object, that's a specific eye. That does not.
Right.
That does not.
So
The general continues.
what is the general continuum? What are you talking about?
The general eye is the eye that's imputed on
Kwe di la go ro again. Ta chi sam ba jo re di ke wa ching na du go re la go wa ko se se go re. Yin na
Imputed by others or imputed by yourself?
Di du go ma re la go. Ta ko go ma ngo thum go ge.
So what if you don't have any
Ta chi
invitation?
sam ba jo re sa wa ge ka chi ke wa ma ba ta di du go re. Chara chira ba ta ta sha ta di ko du ma re la go wa ge. Ta ko thum go. Okay. Any question? Yeah? No, I just informed Geshe what you just said. Oh, Geshe didn't. Can you go over West? And then I said, Jawa Chin, a chill do a task, touch somebody again. Tash of a did what goes so again. That touch about Jawa Takana Tash, Tadi, Takara, them or the Jawashima Duma, the next Jawashima West again.
did your da ngaz da som shawara.
No,
Said the Kavasha da said the Pumbo Tasha, the go she do the mere to
Tadi Mepchadura.
Red over the Sina, caught some men to Joya Marco, said the Kavasha, but mere, but the cook, Nevada to the gun, Dodigora.
I don't know so. This sum the son to get that, thousand so on.
Toma, just about da said, Toma, you want to get
Chisamba Tadi.
that day Joe Lende da Chagara.
No, the Chabar Chabatache.
I think she said the show is not.
Somebody?
That did the Kaza. Say, what's the puzzle? Said the Chevas da in the car. What's the puzzle? Said the
Ale
Chevas.
did it. Ale Chabar di Chabar Chabata, Benako Pumbo de Meratan to the Tad, Mev Chas and God who slept your work. Mev Shala Jimmer, what you do?
Said the Chevas said the Pumbo Tasha, said the Pumbo Tasha, that Mev Shara.
A pet for Mev and Tab, you know, Josh Modoyama.
That said the Pumbo Tasha, Mev Shara, Pumbo Mev Shara.
No, just then, Ben Altinze Dojata again. Gyawadi Gyawada Rawage. Tangashi do the Galia, Tenzin Dorjee Lai, said the Gyawajabati, that do I Yomarwa.
that said, that said the Kebab Shin and Romarga. Roger Dawson and Rigid said the Kebab Shin and Romarwa.
Or they say Jabajanet to Gomarwa. Change it. So, yeah, Geshe is trying to differentiate, right? There are different kind of self, there's more sort of a generic self that we can call from the beginning of this time until whatever, right? That. Then with every rebirth, we might have another self designated for that particular one. So that may, right, not go because let's say I use myself, I'm called Tenzin Dorjee in this life, right? If I die, that particular associated with might not go. Right, yeah.
I just said that. That's in opposition to you.
No.
It is.
No.
The person doesn't go to the next life.
There's two types, general
Oh.
and specific. So the walks and one doesn't go, right?
Everybody's told, but most of one doesn't go.
The general eye, mere eye continues.
So in Lama Tsongkhapa's right commentary on the middle, work called Geshe Gyeltsen, it has that clarification, the distinct. Lama Tsongkhapa's work called Geshe Gyeltsen, right, that commentary on the Didima, Geshe Gyeltsen, Umedwe. No. Right, Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on the Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom called Geshe Gyeltsen. So that makes that distinction, right, two selves.
There's a related
So
question.
one more, and I have announcements and prayers. Yeah.
There's a related question online. It's pretty simple. Oh, sort of. If I pray for someone who passed away using their name that I know, will they get my prayers from wherever they are, even if reborn and given a new name? So basically, if they pass, you
Right.
you got it.
Condition did is target on the Rawage. So was Cell Death on the Rawage. Cell Death Ming the burn in Delia, that's more on Gaba in Rawage. So the dog meets the Sende, the Kiwa Savage Land Ming Chibut Gaba in Rawage. Near Melam Gabjo, and Koralia dribble the top good reverse work, and Melam Gabba Patun to good Maras.
Said the Pegger Congratulations. Then the common Jaguar, said the kid of the Javato years. This is called Zados in the Mount Jaguar.
If you watch my day, could Dawa maybe Ming Shabai and Kata, the Melam dig that.
That's a piggy.
Yeah, Geshe feels that, yeah, it could still benefit the person, right? That even though, because based upon our relationship in this lifetime, right, as a friend or whatever, for the deceased person, we remember their name and we make prayers. Then in their next life, we don't know where they are born, now we're all strangers. But still, Geshe feels that this could benefit, right? Depending upon how much benefit depends on many other factors. Yeah. Would you be the kind of special one? All right. A pity of almost. Oh, didn't say. Oh, yeah, Geshe is saying that in the Abhidhamma Kosha, Treasure of Knowledge, there's example given how our prayers could benefit them. In the sense, the example is just like how, I can't say the English word, calf, C-A-L-F, calf, the baby cow, right? Baby cow, because of relationship with the mother, always follow where the mother goes. So like that, when we make calf, so like that, our prayers, right, based upon our relationship, right, as a friendship or as based upon like family relationship, whatever we make prayer, it benefits them. Let me say the things to Geshe in Tibetan and then come back in English. Can the Seta da Jamju Shue in the Yobage? Seta Shue the D again. The Chinda Shive 30 Nisanga Sapemba the Wagon. Sapemba delia on the Jose Power Jibuki Tangju share the wagon. Kazangema Chidon, you don't chungi la Kundi depend Paji one number wagon. That digi Carso or a cutting chendens or lot about the Tangju Lindy or wagon. The answer. The name comes Salhaka like Kishan Namani, Pigazenda Chitigo, 디 콘조 단다 로존 시게마 다 데비테에서와 저기 디 제로체서 데네 첼레 데바 만정이마 로주체 아니 콤바타잔로 로바시비체데 있어 데비드 카우스키사 로아게 코란리아 디 좀좀 나로나스 데네 티닝 디케데셔게 nga리 르모치 십십케도 와게 디 투메시 암스 나로나 데네 간저 키두 단다 왕모요로와 Vietnamese mod song 단다 디 도데로와 디 투메 잠스 나로 디 멤버 담마 나 시베 디가 사마 시점으로 나오는 쇼이게 So announcement first. This is what I got from Geshe Gyeltsen vessel, who couldn't be here at this moment. We all know that in 2012 we were very fortunate to receive Yamantaka empowerment for His Holiness. So to commemorate that, every year we try to do, those who have done the Yamantaka retreat, we do self-initiation, self-empowerment, and so on April 25th, Saturday, we will do that. And they said the details are on the GSTDL website. Yeah. And then for those who are attending the Wednesday class, so they said now they have, they're ready with the book, the physical book and the PDF version already created will be available to all the participants. And the two Geshe Gyeltsen, they will, you will together do our late Geshe Shantideva Gyeltsen's commentary on the 8 verses mind training. This is from the book called Keys to Great Enlightenment. So the physical copy of the book will be available as well as PDF more for the online participants there. We have a prayer request for a deceased person who is a former TDL student and long-time supporter of the monastery tools, David Kowski. And also, I realized...
Mount Shasta.
Huh?
Mount Shasta.
Oh, Mount Shasta, I was saying. And then Ngati Rinpoche is, I think today is 49th day, I realized. Ngati Rinpoche is the younger brother of His Holiness. And then we also know that one of our old-time students, Wang Mo, the Vietnamese, right, who moved to Virginia, she passed away. And then we know many people, right, especially in the wars on both sides, a lot of people killed, so please think about them. And so we will do the Avalokiteshvara prayer and dedication. Oh, next Sunday? Oh, so we will do the talk after right teaching. Right. Rinpoche ki DK sarwa, namza sungjo sarwa, sanyama shungma DK. So the next Sunday, we will also, right after the teaching, we will skip the Q&A and do the anniversary of His Eminence Lati Rinpoche, right? Talk offering. Okay. Thank you for that reminder. Chadong Kole Yove Yebo Dong Jendong Yewa Sangbe Sangye Dong Kangla Kangde Tela Tedong Zumba Jenre Sela Chanze Lo Omani Beme Omani Beme Omani Beme Beme Omani Beme Hore, Gewa Di Nyodo da Jere Sewan, Rujone, Dowa Chija Malio, Deye Sala Geba Sho. Lode Jazu Udon Bega Den, Kezan Pove, Judo, Minba Shin, Tenba Zenla, Wando Yicho, Tanyan Chugun Chola, Sowa. De Mawang Dame, Quinjan Donga de Kangri Jongso, Nida Seze, Jamgun Jawa, Niba Yapse, Tangsong Tenzi, Mawe, Shiba, Tenzin Jebe, Yingon Zebe, Shiji, Nigun Changju, Dendu, Longdo Tamje, Bebe, Beyun, Duja Gazu, Gundo, Shabden, Tesang Kondang, Chezu, Zombe, Yongzo, Yure, Tobe, Nyage Shin, Longri, Tejin, Nubu, Bed. Tuden Kanri, Dabo, Shadin Shong, Dona Kongmen, Zaba, Namda, Tendan Rowe, Pende Jove, Rindo Jumi, Chibe, Chinleji, Kesan Duje, Dendo, Shabde, Chizun Lamen, Toge, Melamda, Kesan Duje, Tendan Sab. Chosun Todo, Chido, Zomba Yi, Chida, Membe, Dungu, Lindo, Sho, Ramjan Shingi, Gombo, Zeba, Men, Zudo, Namje, Geyun. Chojo Seiye, Lazo, Tamje, Daden, Mishi, Choge, Mudu, Tuden, Jedang, Losan, Jawa Yi, Shiru, Tenban Zimbe, Beiyun, Tadu, Duja, Gyongwe, Xinye, Cho, Yangdu, Ninje, Wongbo, Jiden, Sumgun, Chana, Beme, Denbe, Zawa, Soso, Taba, Namda, Sudi, Yangda, Lamba, Yi, Losan, Jeden, Bedo, Shabden, Tuzhong Yajin, Nonzin, Yangbe, Samjo, Namje, Sanjin, Junbe, Gomjong, Shila, Songjo, Dibu, Denbe, Ngada, Chenpo, Shabde, Chebe, Donga, Kowa, Bojo, Zunbe, Rilan, Siyu, Bunja, Zunbe, Denden, Leshe, Tangzhen, Kiru, Xinyin, Chenpo, Shabden, Shu, Kebe, Langdo, Kuxi, Zeta, Zunbe, Chara, Niezo, Rangsa, Sangbun, Dije, Rigun, Yixin, Sumden, Xinyin, Chenpo, Shabden, Tezang Roland Jobe, Dendeji, Menjun, Tajue, Zangme, Sijin, Pabjin, Zidin, Denjun, Senden, Xinyin, Chenpo, Shabden, Shu, Chozong, Jawa, Seje, Chinla, Tudin, Tamjin, Songmen, Chona, Taja, Hasang, Dab, Jeda, Memben, Dungu, Lundo, Shu, Changju, Simjo, Rinpo, Maje, Bana, Jeju, Yewa, Nyamba, Meba, Yang, Kone, Kondo, Pewa, Shu, Tongni, Dawa, Rinpo, Maje, Bana, Jeju, Yewa, Nyamba, Meba, Kone, Kondo, Pewa, Shu, Sa, Shi, Bujin, Joshi, Mendo, Zhang, Rira, Lingxi, Ninde, Yenba, Sangye, Xindo, Mede, Viva, Yi, Rogun, Nanda, Jeba, Shu, Kangri, Rabe, Gorwe, Xingam, Su, Pendang, Dewa, Malu, Zhongwe, Jianre, Siwan, Tenzin, Gyaltsen, Yi, Shabe, Sidi, Bat, Tenju, Ji, Idang, Guru, Ratna, Mandela, Niyan, Daya, Min, Yewa, Gundo, Yangda, Lamanda, Reme, Cheji, Bela, Loju, Sada, Lamye, Yunde, Rabzo, Doje, Changi, Goban, Yudo,